The label bad boy of classical music is nothing new. Anyone remember the violinist Nigel Kennedy? Well, British pianist James Rhodes is the latest to attract the tag. At his concerts, there are no program notes, no dress codes and no rules. And his publicists claim he's doing for classical music what Jamie Oliver did for cooking. Lisa Whitehead caught up with James Rhodes at the Melbourne Festival at the start of his first Australian tour.
The audience for this classical piano recital is a little different to the norm, attracted by the star of this sellout show who defiantly breaks all the rules.
One of the things that I have a problem with classical music is that you go to a concert, the guy walks on stage, gives you a quick bow, leaves, plays, and then he off home. And there's no real communication other than that.
The new bad boy of classical music, British pianist James Rhodes, shuns the uniform, bow tie and tails and wears his tattoos with pride.
This is going to make me sound much more intelligent than I am, and I'm not. Bertrand Russell, I think, he said every great idea starts out as a blasphemy. So the idea of wearing jeans and talking to the audience and playing the piano was, initially, I think, people said it's never going to catch on.
In just a couple of years since he burst on the music scene, the 35-year-old's unconventional style has won him fans and accolades. His first album reached #1 in the classical charts. He's the first classical act to be signed by rock label Warner and even has his own TV series.
The thing that I find is that the presentation of classical music is it makes it quite inaccessible to people. You know, there seems to be this idea that you need to know how to pronounce the names of the composers, when to clap, what to wear, you know, you have to sit straight. You have to actively listen, concentrate on every note and nod in the right places. I mean, it's all so pretentious and it's such rubbish. It's called the Wallenstein Sonata because he dedicated it to Count Wallenstein, who was this super rich guy who just basically gave Beethoven a shitload of money and said, don't worry about paying the bills or anything, you just compose. And I always like to mention that in case, on the off chance, there's someone...
Tonight he's kicking off his Australian tour at the Melbourne Recital Centre. But he also loves to perform his entirely classical repertoire at small, intimate venues and music festivals, shrugging off convention and urging the audience to do the same.
All bets are off. Wear what you want, clap when you want, chat with the audience, have the lighting kept to a minimum so you can make out with your date like at the cinema. You know, have a drink while you're listening and just relax and let it wash over you.
Many who come to see the pianist with the rock star attitude don't listen to the music of the great composers and have never been to a classical concert before.
And one of the things people say sometimes is, well, you know, I don't listen to classical music because there are no lyrics or anything. But then I think, well, it always tells a story. There's this great piece by Schumann, who he fell in love with Clara, who was to become his wife. He wrote something like 161 songs just for her. I think it's a little creepy, but, you know, it obviously worked because they got married. And one of them is called Dedication, and it's one of the most beautiful... I mean, just the opening is so... It's like the perfect love song. He ended up alone, suicidal, penniless, in an insane asylum where he died.
James Rhodes' own story is marked by a troubled past. As a child, he was sexually abused and battles with the booze, drugs and anorexia followed. He suffered a nervous breakdown and had several stints in psychiatric wards.
I don't think there's anything unique about madness. I just think there's a lot of people who don't like talking about it, and I think that's a real shame. So I think it's important to give it a name, to give it a voice, and not to dwell on it necessarily, but just say, yeah, it's happened. There have been some very difficult times, and yet here I am, amazingly.
These days he's clean and sober, but admits to a love affair with coffee, cigarettes and Twitter.
You know, Twitter is like, I always like to think of it as the kind of the biggest and yet friendliest psychiatric ward in this kind of virtual world. When I get someone on Twitter saying to me, I'd never heard the Bach Bisogni Chaconne in my life, wouldn't even know how to spell it, and yet I heard you play it, I bought your CD, I'm now listening to it on the tube to work every morning, and it's amazing. And that, to me, I mean, that's worth, $1 million.
Surprisingly, James Rhodes didn't start playing seriously until he was 14, and after leaving school didn't play a note for 10 years. But a chance meeting in a cafe a few years ago with the man who would become his manager changed his life. He financed his first album, and the rest is history. Have the last few years seemed surreal to you?
It's kind of like an Amy Winehouse in reverse kind of thing. You know, I did all the drugs and the alcohol and the madness, and then, thank God, or I don't know how it worked, but yeah, just a sequence of random events. Everything seemed to align, and I got to be careful not to sound too much like Deepak Chopra or anything, but everything's just seemed to slot into place.